Every single spring, you see them pop up. They're all over your social media feeds, these memes and posts that are super confident, telling you that Easter is really just a stolen pagan holiday. A Christian makeover of an ancient festival for some fertility goddess. But how true is any of that really? Let's dig into the history and see if we can separate the facts from the online fiction.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen posts exactly like these. They get shared by millions of people, all claiming the name Easter is just how we mispronounce Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess, and that all the symbols, the eggs, the bunnies, are actually ancient symbols of fertility. It all sounds so convincing, doesn't it? Like some secret history that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
So for this explainer, we're going to put on our detective hats. We're going to take these super popular internet claims and actually test them against the real historical and linguistic evidence. Think of it as an investigative journey to fact-check what is really going on with the history of Easter.
Our first and definitely most famous suspect is Ishtar, the ancient goddess from Babylon. This is the claim you see everywhere. It's pretty much the foundation for the entire pagan Easter theory you see online. So, let's break this down point by point.
First things first, the name. The whole meme hinges on the idea that Ishtar is just pronounced Easter. So, is it? Well, the short answer from linguists who actually study ancient Akkadian is nope, not even close. The real pronunciation was something like Ishtar or maybe Ishtar. That similarity you see, it's just a coincidence in modern English spelling, nothing more.
Okay, so what about her job description? The memes always call her the goddess of fertility and sex. And look, sexuality was definitely part of her thing, but calling her just a fertility goddess is a huge oversimplification. Her main jobs were way more complex, and honestly, a lot more intimidating. She was a major goddess of war, of political power, and she was tied to the planet Venus. Fertility? That was a pretty small part of her overall resume.
And then we have the symbols. The memes are very specific here, saying eggs and bunnies were sacred to Ishtar. But when we look at the actual archaeology in the ancient texts, what we find is a totally different set of symbols. Ishtar's known symbols were the 8-pointed star, the lion, a symbol of her power, and the city gate. There is zero, and I mean zero, historical evidence that connects her to eggs or rabbits.
Another huge claim is that the Roman Emperor Constantine just swooped in, hijacked a pagan festival, and slapped a Christian label on it. But the timeline just doesn't work. We have records from way back in 190 AD showing that Christians were already celebrating the resurrection. In fact, they were having these huge arguments about when the right date to celebrate it was. This was over a century before Constantine even converted to Christianity. That famous Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, they didn't invent Easter. They just standardized the date for a holiday that was already hundreds of years old.
Maybe the single biggest piece of evidence against the whole Ishtar theory is the name itself. I mean, if the holiday really came from this Babylonian goddess, you'd think we'd see her name pop up all over the Christian world. But we don't. Just look at this table. In almost every single European language, the word for the holiday is some version of Pascha, which comes from Pesach. That's the Hebrew word for Passover. That's because the Christian celebration is fundamentally linked to the Jewish Passover. English, as you can see, is the odd one out here. We're the weird ones.
Which brings us perfectly to our next suspect, the one who's responsible for that weird English name, the Germanic goddess Eostre. This is the other name that you always see floating around in the memes, often pitched as the real pagan source of the holiday.
Okay, so just how much ancient evidence do we have for the supposedly major goddess? This much. 1. A single mention. In one historical text. The entire case for this big Easter festival rests on a foundation that is incredibly thin. And here it is. This is the entire reference. It's from a book written by an English monk, the Venerable Bede, way back in 725 AD. He was writing about the old Anglo-Saxon names for the months, and he just casually notes that April, which they called Easter Monoth, was named after a goddess called Easta. That's it. That's everything we have.
Now, because the evidence was so thin, for a very long time a lot of historians just figured Bede probably made her up. But more recent research, especially from a historian named Philip Shaw, suggests she was probably a real local goddess. He points to things like place names that might mean Istre's district, and even personal names like Easterwine, which literally means friend of Istra.
So it looks like Eostre was probably a real local goddess. But here's the crucial point. What did she actually give to the modern holiday? Just one thing, its name. And only in English and in German. When Christianity came to England, the Anglo-Saxons just kept using the name of their spring month, Eostermaneth, for the Christian festival that fell during that time. The timing, the meaning, the traditions of the celebration, all of that was already there.
So if our main suspects, Ishtar and Istra, didn't give us our traditions, then where on earth did they come from? Now we get to the fun part, uncovering the real and often much more practical origins of Easter's most famous symbols.
This is the big one, right? The question everybody asks. If they aren't some ancient pagan fertility symbols tied to these goddesses, what in the world are they doing in a Christian holiday?
The origin of the Easter egg has nothing to do with paganism and everything to do with medieval economics and Christian fasting. See, for centuries, Christians had a really strict 40-day fast for Lent. During that time, they couldn't eat animal products, and that included eggs. But of course, their chickens didn't get the memo, they just kept on laying. So what happened? By Easter Sunday, people had a massive surplus of eggs. It just became a tradition to celebrate the end of that long, hard fast by decorating and feasting on all those stockpiled eggs.
Now, the Easter Bunny is a much, much newer tradition. The character that we all know today is mostly an American commercial creation that grew out of a piece of Northern European folklore, the German Osterhase, which translates to Easter hare.
And why a hare? Well, it was pretty simple. Hares are normally really shy animals, but they become super active and visible in the springtime during their mating season. The sight of them boxing each other in the fields was just a popular folk sign that winter was finally over. And get this, the hare wasn't even the only animal. In Germany, there was also an Easter fox and an Easter stork. The hare was just the version that German and Dutch immigrants brought with them to the US, where it got commercialized and eventually turned into the Easter bunny we know today.
Okay, so we've debunked the main theories. We know where the eggs and bunnies really came from. But that leads us to the final, and I think most surprising, part of our whole investigation.
If Ishtar has absolutely nothing to do with Easter, and Eoster only gave us the English name, where did all these elaborate stories about pagan origins come from in the first place? Who actually invented them?
The answer is not some ancient pagan priest or a New Age author or an internet atheist. The ultimate source for most of these claims is this guy, Alexander Hislop, a Scottish fundamentalist Christian minister from the 19th century.
Hislop was extremely anti-Catholic, and he came up with this really wild conspiracy theory that the Catholic Church was secretly just a continuation of the ancient Babylonian mystery religion. To try and prove it, he used really bad linguistics and just made up connections between Catholic practices and ancient paganism. It was Hislop who first created the link between Easter and Ishtar to push his argument.
And this is where the journey of this misinformation gets really fascinating. Hislop's anti-Catholic ideas were picked up by 19th century occultists and spiritualists. From there, they got adopted by modern neo-pagans who were looking for ancient roots. And then, in a wild twist of irony, by new atheist groups who were looking for arguments against Christianity. And now, today, they spread all over the globe as memes, totally disconnected from their original fundamentalist Christian source.
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that the stories we see online can have incredibly strange and ironic origins. A story that starts as an anti-Catholic argument from a Christian fundamentalist can morph into a celebrated piece of hidden history for neo-pagans and atheists. It just goes to show that the best defense we have against misinformation isn't just knowing the right answer. It's getting into the habit of always asking the most important question: where did this story actually come from?